everyone, and welcome to SSW TV. I'm at NDC Sydney with Michelle. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello.
So, you've just
What's your name again?
Sorry, I'm Adam.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Welcome to SSW TV.
Thank you.
So, we were just having a conversation about change and about how it's hard for companies to actually maintain a broad aspect of experience. So what do you think about that?
Well, so our company, Solliance, in fact, kind of came about from a long history of, us as individuals going and doing consulting with customers for a week at a time, let's say, and helping them design their full stack on WCF and SOA.
Cool.
And then, obviously, as things have evolved, now we've got the cloud and the different kinds of clouds and big data analytics and machine learning and now it's microservices and the various different architectures with Docker or Service Fabric, and then the flavors of that, security, identity, compliance, all these things that are, basically in their own right, very deep areas of expertise are needed to help you navigate the path, right? And so what I found is that, as an individual, you can't know all of it. It's impossible, right? And be really, really good at all of it. You can know enough about it to make decisions, but when it comes time to actually do a design, I mean, what we do is we bring in people that do just that one thing, So who is the best person I know on machine learning or, data science or identity and access management, and then of course some of those things fall into my purview and I'm part of that process. So, we just try to make sure the right person's doing the right thing so that the customer's getting the best possible team around a problem.
So this isn't just in the design stage, this isn't just in the implementation phase, this is even in design, you're bringing in external people to consult and tell you how to do all these things.
It's the most important time.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, if you don't take a step back in design and think about, do I even need to look at this problem now, then how do you know what you should be planning for, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so some of those areas are really big. So it's really hard to stay just across everything that's happening in the cloud space at the moment, or everything that's happening in microservices. So what are you doing around those spaces?
Around microservices specifically?
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of the buzzword flavor of the decade, I guess, probably. We haven't quite reached a decade of it, but for a few years now. I would say this, people are having trouble managing large monolithic applications. And then the old days of monolith was one big executable that you hit compile and went to lunch and came back and hoped it was done. Now the monolith is, I've built this website, I've got these APIs behind it, I've added other services, now I have third-party partners and mobile apps, and I've added code, and there's many people on the team that are adding code, and nobody's really overseeing reuse, compartmentalization. So now it gets to the point where you've got to update a feature and put your hand up if you're afraid to roll that out because you're not sure if it's going to impact other features of the site that you don't know about and whether or not that piece of code is shared or, you know what I mean? So the idea behind, one of the many ideas behind microservices would be the idea of keeping things better isolated from one another.
So you're not building distributed monoliths, that kind of idea, like where so the different parts of the microservice, the way they interact, there's quite...
Right, like the idea being that you're building smaller components, services that are used by the whole system, and maybe you're able to better update and add features, and they have their own life cycle of design, development, feature additions, deployment, management, patching, that hopefully, as long as the interface and semantic doesn't change, doesn't impact the rest of the system. So now I can update this one thing, and I can know that I'm not going to bring other features down, right? And you can't really do that when things are all intermingled and intertwined. So I think it's really more of a direction that people want to head to, and then of course the panacea would be, hey, let's go greenfield and let's take a platform that's focused on microservices and actually start building these containers or services that I deploy in Service Fabric, and from the beginning think about isolation, right? So not everybody has a chance to do it from scratch right now. So they've got these monolithic applications. They need to start looking at tearing pieces out into these reusable services that no longer intertwine with the rest of the system.
It's interesting where you're saying tearing the services out piece by piece. Are you seeing a lot of people tearing their front end out piece by piece?
It's not really the front end. I mean, it's the pieces behind that front end that could possibly be shared or reused across several front ends or several mobile apps and third-party partners that might access those APIs, right?
Yeah.
So the API tier is the most logical place to start when you think about building microservices on an existing application. So a lot of people might look at saying, okay, let's leave our websites as they are, but the APIs that they call, instead of commingling them and deploying them as part of the same website node, that actual physical deployment, let's take that API that's being called and let's start building an API tier that is my microservices tier that can scale in a different way than the front end.
Yep.
And let's start allowing those services to be reused by other areas outside of that website so that I can, maybe serve other areas of the organization. Think about large corporations that have many development teams, and let's just say that one group is building, applications for accounting and backends that relate to the rest of the organization, and they want to be able to stand that up and have it scale for the whole organization. So they're going to start with one group, and then they're going to start letting people in, maybe with an API management control layer or something like that.
So that sounds like a good strategy, but there's obviously a lot of complexity just getting to that stage.
I know.
So for people who are watching and they think, well, I want to start going down that path, what are the first two steps that they're looking at?
I think the first step is really to pick whatever area is the biggest pain point in the system in terms of your ability to update features and deploy changes and that kind of thing, and take a step back and start designing what are the services in this solution. Break things into pieces that become potentially reusable, right? So here is where I place orders in a store. Here is where we fulfill the orders. Here is the customer management tier. Here is the reporting tier. And now I've got these compartments that are separated. And then start thinking about what are the data models that they access. And at some point you're going to have to think about relations. And I talked about this in my session, that at some point it starts to matter that customers and orders need to be related, and I have to pull those together. But if you start going down that problem right away, then I think it becomes overwhelming really quickly. First, you need to see a picture of, if I was starting fresh, how would I break this up? And then start thinking about, okay, we can't do it all now. Hey, what if we take this one piece and start there?
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting way. That's a really good advice on how to get started. But what would you say is the biggest thing that I'm going to hit the biggest problem that I don't know about now that I should look out to try and avoid?
Well, I think your platform choices and the ramp up of those platform choices could be a big issue. So I've had some customers where they really want to decide whether they want to head towards a Docker implementation or they want to go to a Service Fabric implementation. And when you're a .NET shop, Service Fabric feels very natural because you've got the tooling and the Visual Studio and the familiarity. And if you're already in Azure, that's all very natural as well. But there's people that are really fans of the whole containerization story, and maybe they're interested a little bit more in that lightweight DevOps experience that comes with the command line the tooling that goes with the Docker environment, is a little bit different.
Have you got a leaning one way or the other, or do you think it's on a case by case basis? Do you think it's a case by case basis?
Yeah, here's what I usually do. Design first without the platform. Because I think it's really important you have a vision of where you're going to go. And then you have to look at, what does my team know? Are we Linux or Windows? Are we willing to go Linux? Are we willing to take that on? Because maybe it's not that hard. So there's that question. And then you've got, what is our current code base and what would be the ramp up to learn something new, right? So, there's almost too many choices right now. So it's better to have the design first and then take a step back and go, okay, if we were to go with Linux based on our current code base, what is that going to mean to the ecosystem of our developers and so on, right? If you're going to migrate the whole thing, it's easier to make a complete switch and maybe go to, Azure Container Services and, the Mesos, data center operating system, right? Or something like that. That's a really great experience for people if they're doing microservices on Docker, on Azure. And if I'm migrating everything, then that's sort of an all-in approach that might be a nice experience. But if I'm just going to take some pieces out and do Docker Linux in the middle, it might not feel as natural if I've got .NET on top and, and then SQL Azure on the back. It might feel more natural to fit Service Fabric in the middle as a services tier that has that same health monitoring, discovery capability of the services in the tier, plus I get the state management aspects that I don't get out of the box with the Docker platforms. So that's kind of a nice sweet spot. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Sure.
And to chat about microservices.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for joining us on SSW TV.
Hey everybody, it's me, Scott Hanselman, here with Adam Kogan at NDC Sydney. We're hanging out. It's SSW Video. How are you, sir? That's how you do an intro. No, go ahead. I'll be right here, please.